soon?
2026.
Okay. All right. Okay.
2026.
All right. We're coming up in now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. We have got a lot to talk about here. Let's talk about the FBI. Is it new? Is it old? What is it? We know that throughout their history, they have weaponized intelligence against progressives, really. We know so much about what they did to Dr. King and to Malcolm X and to others who are progressive, but also people in the entertainment field and in the world of culture. Not right wingers, but people who would be on the so called left. That having been said, we have a new sheriff in town, if you will, and someone just his deputy, Dan Bongino, who is known to be a right wing firebrand. But I think that their stories are more complex than that. So we're going to get into it today as we talk about Kash Patel, the new director of the FBI, a former prosecutor, someone who said, yeah, I'll have an enemies list. What does that mean? Uh, but he also wants reforms. He wants people to get out of Washington and get out into the field. There are a lot of things to pull apart here, and starting with his own history. So let's talk with a dear family friend of the show, indeed, Chip Gibbons. You are so brilliant, and I just always love to sit back and listen from you. He's the policy director for Defending Rights and Dissent. They deserve and need your support. But let me tell you, everybody, we have some exciting news. This brilliant journalist you can read in The Nation and Jacobin, he has a book coming out on the history of the FBI. I love it. It'll be out in 2026, but he's on deadline. So we got to get right to it so we can hear what he's got to say today. And I'm so happy to have you here. And I cannot wait to read this book about the history of the FBI. I know it's going to be really, really fascinating. And I'm going to learn things that I absolutely do not know. So let us begin. Help me to understand who Kash Patel is. He seems to be a rather interesting figure.
Well, I think the most important fact about him is that he's a Trump loyalist, and Trump only likes people who are loyal. I think, whatever sort of different tendencies we see in Trump's coalition, the key to advancement with Donald Trump is being loyal to him. And Kash Patel he is an interesting figure because, as you note, he has talked about reform. He was an aide involved with Representative Nunes. He was involved in the so-called Nunes memo, which criticized the FBI's handling of the FISA Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant for Carter Page. Carter Page was a Trump campaign official. He also taught at my alma mater, Bard College, not when I was there. Yes, I was very surprised to read that in one of his profiles. He taught in the Bard Globalization and International Affairs program.
That's interesting.
That is strange. He's a strange man. And it is true, the FBI did mishandle the application for Carter Page's warrant. In response to this, there was a very critical Inspector General's report. And in response to that, they selected a number of FISA warrant applications at random and looked at them. And guess what they found? They found they had mishandled all of them. So when it comes to sort of the abuses against someone like Carter Page, it's less indicative to me that there is a bias against Trump and the FBI, and more indicative that there is widespread failure to comply with any sort of rules or regulations. I mean, they looked at the Carter Page warrant. The application was not handled correctly, but then they did a wider review and they found those mistakes were present in nearly all of their warrant applications. And the reason why, not to get too technical, the reason why that these sorts of rules were even in place the ones they broke with Carter Page was because in 2000 it came out the FBI had lied to the FISA court in 75 different warrant applications. And all of those warrants, it seems like this is from the Clinton era, were about supporters of Palestinian rights, which is a group that has been heavily targeted and has been heavily abused and has been weaponized. So Kash Patel has talked about greater declassification, sort of an advocate for the surveilled at the FISA court, and those are all good suggestions, very mild suggestions too. They're not radical suggestions in terms of what's even acceptable inside of Washington. But he also has this Trump loyalist persona, and he has stated they will come after the enemies of Trump. And where I've been most disturbed is where he has said they're going to come after the media and their sources. Of course, unfortunately, we've seen members of both parties use the FBI and the Department of Justice to come after whistleblowers, to come after journalists. And if you look at what they did to Julian Assange, you look at what they did to Edward Snowden, you look at what they did to Chelsea Manning, you look what they did to Jeffrey Sterling, defending rights and dissent board member, and James Risen. For people who aren't familiar with that case, James Risen published a book called Bush at War. He revealed a number of things in it, including the warrantless NSA wiretapping, not the Snowden wiretapping. There's so many NSA wiretapping scandals, I have to specify which of the many times they spied on us without warrants I'm referring to. Otherwise, we might get confused. The Bush era one, not the Snowden one, the Bush era one.
Okay.
Yes. And he also had information about a botched covert action against Iran. And the FBI pulled his phone records. They discovered he was talking to a former CIA employee called named Jeffrey Sterling. And they put Jeffrey Sterling on trial under the Espionage Act. And Jeffrey's a friend of mine, and he maintains to this day he was not Risen's source. And that James Risen had written several articles about his racial discrimination lawsuit against the CIA. But they put him on trial based on the fact that he had called James Risen on the phone. They had the phone records, and he was convicted of being a source that he claims he wasn't. So there's this pattern of abuse here that you can really heavily go after journalists. You can pull their phone records. You can see who they're talking to. You can put the people they're talking to on trial. And if you follow what Trump in his first term, did to Julian Assange, you can even in some cases put the journalist on trial. So the FBI has really expansive surveillance powers, and there are very loose laws that criminalize core aspects of journalism. So to have someone who is this sort of Trump loyalist claiming they're going to go after his enemies in the media, claiming they're going to go after government insiders who share information with journalists, I don't care how much he talks about transparency and repealing or reforming the deep state, this is someone who's quite dangerous. I'm not enthusiastic for the Kash Patel era.
And you said extraordinarily so.
I think so, yeah.
I mean, and why would it be extraordinary? Because I have to be frank with you, when I think of the FBI and when I don't think of them, when I watch their actions down through the years, they have always, let's say, functioned outside of the law.
Yes.
So extraordinary, that's a little unsettling. If he's extraordinary and strange, as you have characterized him, help me to understand that.
Sure. I think that there is a long history of abusive action by the FBI, and I think it continues to the present. You know, Hoover was responsible for spying on Dr. King, for trying to blackmail him into trying to commit suicide. I think people maybe know that story. If not, the FBI, they think it was William Sullivan, who was Hoover's number 2 at the time, or number 2. And he sent him a letter with sort of tapes they had recorded from his hotel rooms, telling him they were going to, if he didn't kill himself, they would release them. So the FBI has a really dark history. In fact, going back to over 100 years. One thing that Hoover wouldn't do, though, is he wouldn't help Nixon sort of go after his personal enemies, and this creates this huge where Nixon almost fires Hoover because he thinks he's gotten too soft. So even Hoover had a limit when it came to sort of Nixon's personal vendetta. Doesn't make J. Edgar Hoover a great man. He's probably the worst dictator we ever had in this country. If anyone was a dictator in this country, it was J. Edgar Hoover. But he had this sort of limitation where he would not have done something like the Watergate break-in. In fact, the reason, Nixon has to go to his plumbers because he feels that Hoover has gotten too soft or too whatever. Whereas Patel, he is personally pledging to go after Trump's personal enemies.
Yeah.
So it's not just this broad national security abuse. It is turning the FBI into a personalized hit squad of the president. I still think Hoover in the end is going to be worse than Patel. There was a New Yorker article that implied Patel was less dangerous than Hoover. I don't buy that. But I do think it is extraordinarily dangerous to put someone who is willing to use the FBI for personal vendettas in charge of an agency that has expansive surveillance powers and a long history of abusing them. But whatever abuses Patel commits, he can only get away with because of the history of the FBI in this country, because of the history of the Espionage Act, and the way all of these national security tools have been legitimized in being used against dissenters.
So we're talking with Chip Gibbons, Policy Director, Defending Rights and Dissent, about Kash Patel, the newly installed head of the FBI. Will things change? Who will he go after? He has declared that he will go after President Trump's enemies. Who are his enemies? What does that mean? Are these political enemies? Are these personal enemies, Chip Gibbons?
So with Trump personally, the list of people who are in Kash Patel's book who were deep state gangsters, it was a pretty incoherent list of people. A lot of them were involved in the deep state, and you and I might in fact think they were gangsters, but it was also just random people who had just criticized Trump on television. So they're really obsessed with certain people who they view as disloyal to them within government or critical of them. I do think we should be realistic about the fact that right now we're seeing a crackdown on pro-Palestinian speech. Mm-hmm. The FBI has since 1967 been going after pro-Palestinian speech, and the Trump administration has really made it clear that they are going to go after supporters of Palestine. And we see them right now targeting people who are lawful permanent residents or on visas. But I don't think that this sort of equation of all criticism of Israel or all support for Palestine with terrorism is going to remain confined to the immigration realm for very long, if it hasn't already gone out of there. And we've seen the FBI engage in these incredibly abusive investigations of supporters of Palestinian human rights for decades. And I do think we should be very worried about what the FBI would look like under any president right now, but particularly since the Trump administration seems willing to throw fuel on a fire that already exists.
Well, who are they following? Are they following the president? Do they have their own agenda? Because, of course, under J. Edgar Hoover, he ran the president or the presidents. They didn't run him because he kept dossiers on everybody. And I don't know if that's ever really changed. So who sets the agenda for the FBI?
I think it's both. Hoover definitely set his own agenda, and he would lie to attorney generals and presidents about what he was doing. But he also responded to political pressure, right? Johnson wanted him to spy on the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, so he did. Johnson,
Fannie Lou Hamer, of course.
Yes. Johnson was very upset about the anti-Vietnam War movement. So every dossier the FBI did on anti-Vietnam War protests went to the Johnson White House. Johnson set up a program with the FBI, the military, the Department of Justice to use the National Security Agency to try to find evidence that the anti-Vietnam War movement was funded by the Soviets. They could never find the evidence. And Hoover, of course, used it to go after civil rights activists. But what I'm pointing out is that there is a history of responding to the concerns of the president or whomever else with things like Vietnam, et cetera. Hoover was also an extraordinarily racist man. He, spied on Black Americans of his own accord. He was a extraordinarily conservative figure. I mean, you go back to different points in the FBI's history, and there's somehow, whatever the excuse is, whatever the threat is, always spying on the same people, right? It's always the NAACP and the Quakers, whether it's terrorism, communism, World War II, somehow we have to go find the NAACP and the Quakers. I don't know why, but we clearly because that's who they're biased against. So I do think there are long-seated biases within the FBI, and whoever the president, they're going to be looking at civil rights protesters, whether that's Black Lives Matter or Dr. Martin Luther King. They're going to be looking at anti-war protesters, and they're especially going to be looking at pro-Palestinian protesters. With Trump in office, he's going to throw fuel on fires that already exist. He shares the FBI's biases against these groups of people. And in some ways, he's even a more arguably extreme version of what they're doing. So the FBI is going to get encouragement in their worst instincts, which are quite bad without Trump. I mean, they were spying on Black Lives Matter and Occupy when Barack Obama was president.
I mean, but they only, it's like the Espionage Act. It's only applied to those, it appears, on the left.
It does appear that way, and it appears that way for a reason. Yes, it's true. They go after the left, and Trump has created in his echo chamber this bizarre belief that the FBI is on the side of the left, and they're only going after like patriotic, conservative Christian. I know that's not true. I know it's a lie. I know it's a lie. But he's running around there saying that. So now the FBI, to appease him, are going to double down on what they're already doing. I mean, think about how
on the left come on
that lie is.
Tip, on the left. I mean, they're embedded on the left. I mean,
I know that. I know that.
I know you know, but I'm like, how did they come up with that? That is absolutely insane.
You've seen social media. Anytime someone posts about the FBI, there's 10,000 people with like MAGA in their name being like, they're all communists who are hunting conservatives. Like, what planet do you live on? But you listen to this right-wing media and they're all talking like that. And it's sort of remarkable, right? You have a political police force in this country. If you're the right, you have a political police force in this country that is targeting your enemies, and now you're claiming they're not targeting your enemies and need to do a better job doing so. So you're pushing them to do what they're already doing, which, where can you get one of those bowler hats? I got mine online. I'm sure you can go to a hat store.
Yes, okay. Correctional officer for the lockdown, you see? That was the first thing. This was Monday. You can see this was at the top of the show. He said, "Where is the bowler hat?" But carrying on.
Yes. So no, I mean, you think about it. I mean, it's sort of ingenious what they're doing, right? In a horrible way. It's.
No, it is. But it's it is so. The thing is, they're the political police.
Yes.
And that to me is very dangerous. Always has been, always will be. Because I have always had it has always been very clear to me that they have an agenda. And it's a bipartisan agenda, because no matter who's in office, when I see the FBI, I don't feel comfortable. When I see the FBI, I mean, no doubt, you have a lot of good agents there. And you have some people who went into the agency wanting to reform, wanting to make things right. But somehow or another, things never get right. They only go after people who are progressive. They only go after people on the so-called left. Not on the so-called, they go after people on the left. They go after people who are fighting, who are punching up. They don't punch, and they punch down because they have so much power. And my question is, this is the weaponization of the intelligence community, the weaponization of the ultimate police agency. Where do we go, particularly in this era? I mean, because now I guess their cause du jour, the Palestinians. Can they take any more hits? My heavens. What are they going to do? Help deport everybody?
It's really scary. I mean, I don't know where they go next. I mean, every time you think it can't get any worse, it does. I mean, we have this horrific genocide in Gaza. We see the Israelis are breaking the ceasefire again. I mean, they killed like 150 people when there was a ceasefire. Now they've completely broken the ceasefire. They've killed 400 people. That's the last death count I saw. Trump is escalating the bombing of Yemen. I mean, every president for the last how many presidents has bombed Yemen, but Trump is escalating it. He is now talking about if the Houthis respond, and of course they're going to respond. We're bombing them. When you drop bombs on people, they respond. He's going to hold Iran accountable for the actions of the Houthis. I see all these people who are his allies, like Tucker Carlson and Thomas Macy, tweeting, "Don't go to war with Iran," which makes me think Trump is planning a war with Iran.
Yeah, but even they're saying it. I'm glad that you responded. You know, he and Thomas Massey, and I happen to have a lot of respect for Thomas Massey. I don't have to agree with everybody on everything, but there's some things that some principal stances that he takes with which I agree. And there's some things that Tucker Carlson says that make me go, you know, you got a point. They have said with Iran, wait a minute, don't do this. But I get the, I don't see a fundamental change in the FBI.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's been some pieces like the New Yorker piece by Beverly Gage. I like Beverly Gage quite a bit,
Yes.
but she was like, "Oh, this is worse than Hoover." You know, Kash Patel is more part. It's not worse than Hoover, but I do think it is a dangerous appointee because the FBI has so much power and they have such a history of abuse. You don't want someone in charge of the political police who's gleeful about political policing. You don't want anyone in charge of the political police, but someone who is like Kash Patel, who's going on like Steve Bannon's War Room and, you know, boasting about we're going to use this against mainstream media, you really don't want him under it.
And they don't say anything about it. The corporate media don't respond. They don't remind us of their history. They're like, okay, he's been confirmed. All right. And that's it. And to me, that is in this heightened political environment. Before I bring up Attorney Mark Fancher so that he can engage with you before you go.
Sure.
This political environment is so. It is already. We already have a conflagration. Okay, I mean, this is a very dangerous political environment, and I'm just wondering what they will do. Will they put the fire out, or will they pour kerosene on it?
Trump's going to pour kerosene on it.
Okay.
And the media is not going to report it correctly, right? Because they want you to think the FBI are the good guys and any bad things that happen are aberrations. I mean, you and I have discussed this before. The FBI has had historically one of the most marvelous propaganda machines in history. They had that movie with Jimmy Stewart in an FBI story, which Ronald Reagan wanted to be in it. But the FBI vetoed his role because he had too many left-wing associations.
At that time. And see, I'm older than you. Mark and I grew up with the FBI television show. That was a top 10 show, destination television on Sunday nights in America. And they were the heroes. Now, mind you, coming out of the civil rights movement as a child, I had a different view of this, of a different experience with the FBI. Not just a view, different experience. So this is way before people knew who J. Edgar Hoover was. And way before you knew who the FBI, what they did to damage people. They tried to drive Dr. King to suicide.
Yes.
And they kept trying. They tried to destroy his family. They tried to do that. Well, and I see someone who boldly steps to the podium as the FBI, as the head of the FBI, and he says, yes, an enemies list is in order. January 6th is in order. Come on.
The other thing is that, you know, there was plenty of evidence well before we came to understand what the FBI had done, that the FBI was engaged in these abusive acts. And the media and a lot of people in politics helped cover it up. In the late 40s, a bunch of information about the FBI spying on Americans, including a movie star, becomes public, and the National Lawyers Guild, the progressive legal group, is putting together a report documenting what they're doing. And Hoover has a wiretap on the Lawyers Guild at this point, and he's breaking their office and he's going through their trash. And they call the president, who's Truman at the time, tell them this report's coming, they're cranks. They likely call Richard Nixon up. And Richard Nixon, the day before the National Lawyers Guild goes public with the report, issues a statement that the National Lawyers Guild are communist that is verbatim to the FBI's internal description of the National Lawyers Guild. Now, there's no evidence no record of the FBI contacting Nixon directly, but the day before this press conference that the FBI is tracking on wiretaps and reporting to the president, Nixon goes public with a report that is verbatim to the FBI's internal report. And then, of course, all the media coverage is Nixon says FBI, or Nixon says NLG are communist.
There'll be, I'm going to bring up Attorney Mark Fancher before you go. Will there be more of where that came from under Kash Patel? That is my concern. That is my question. And before you go, I want Mark, because Mark is in the civil liberty space. He's from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. And are we going to get more of this, Chip?
I think we are. I think it's very likely. I mean, I think that the FBI has always been the political police, and we're seeing people who are gleeful about that role taking over.
That is frightening, and Mark, I brought you on because Chip Gibbons is a part of the family of the show, of the show. He's the policy director, Defending Rights and Dissent. He's writing a book on the history of the FBI that will be out in 2026. Please, you might have to be at the end of 2026 because we don't know what's going to happen in 2025. I've got whiplash already. And is there anything you'd like to ask him, or anything you'd like to state, Mark?
No, it just sounds like it is a much needed project, and I look forward to reading it.
So why do you say it's much needed? Why do you say that?
No, I think people need to understand the nature and the origins of an agency like that. As you were saying earlier, the FBI has always been laser focused on maintaining its image. The FBI television show that you made reference to earlier, the fact is that the scripts for those shows had to be personally approved by J. Edgar Hoover each week before they aired. And he carefully cultivated the image of that agency as a law enforcement organization. But in fact, in many respects was a criminal enterprise. And particularly if you look at the types of crimes that they carried out, specifically against the Black Panther Party and against the American Indian movement. There's a book that's written by Ward Churchill where he documents a lot of the things that they did, and they were just outright crimes. Everything from mail tampering and illegal wiretaps and break-ins to outright murder. So I think that people need to be disabused of any notions that they have about this as just a standard law enforcement organization. It was a law-breaking organization, and it continues to be.
Chip Gibbons, I'm wondering if Americans really understand that. Or if this is something that is a partisan issue. Because to me, it shouldn't be.
The FBI doesn't even define itself as a law enforcement agency anymore. They say they're a intelligence-driven national security agency with intelligence and law enforcement components. Law enforcement's very low on the list of things they do. And one of the things that's always been unique about the FBI globally is that they're a hybrid intelligence national security agency and a law enforcement agency. In other countries, like the United Kingdom, you'll have a domestic intelligence agency like MI5.
MI6.
Have law. What MI6 is like the CIA. MI5
right.
is the
Right. I'm saying,
You're-
but they separate them out.
Yeah, but you also have a law enforcement agency. You have a domestic
Right.
intelligence agency, and you have a law enforcement agency. The FBI is both law enforcement and intelligence. And historically, I mean, there's a lot of abuses in law enforcement. No one should ignore that fact. But historically, the abusive powers of the FBI have come through the intelligence divisions. The Palmer raids were carried out by the intelligence division, which was shut down because it was so abusive. They bring the intelligence division back in the late 30s. They spy on Dr. Martin Luther King. They go after the Quakers. They start the counterintelligence programs. They assassinate Fred Hampton. That's all through the intelligence division. There's no law enforcement purpose that's necessary for these programs. In fact, one of the premises of the counterintelligence program was that the targets they were going after, they couldn't prosecute for crimes. They were engaged in lawful conduct for their speech. So they had to find a extrajudicial, an unlawful way to go after them.
You know, and they do this with the local police, as they did with as they did with these guileless young black men down in Miami who were not looking to blow up anything. They pull them into make them a terrorist cell. Then you look at how the police, Chicago police, were used to kill Fred Hampton, and now the Trump administration, well, you know, and Biden administration wasn't going to stop them because he was hooked up with the police. They pull the restraints off of the police because you can't really investigate them. So it's just...
And it's only gotten worse. I mean, the FBI has what's called, I have to go in a minute, but the FBI has what's called Joint Terrorism Task Force. And most of the employees of the Joint Terrorism Task Force are not FBI. They're local police. And in some cases, the local police, by participating in these task force, are breaking their local laws, because in most places around the world or the country, there are laws that restrict what the police can do that are more strict than what the FBI has imposed on them. So there was some, I think it was, I don't know if it was Oakland or San Francisco, but there was somewhere where there was a lot of concern. Could the police participate in the JTTF without breaking California state law? Because California state law, you can't investigate someone unless you have reasonable suspicion they've committed a crime. That's not how FBI intelligence investigations work. And the FBI was running around saying, oh, there's no problem. But it turned out they had all these internal memos saying that based on the standards for opening an FBI investigation, if these police were participating in the Joint Terrorism Task Force, they were likely violating the law of California. They definitely asked the police to break their own laws.
Chip Gibbons, I think we have to be vigilant. I mean, and I cannot wait for your book to come out. It will be out in 2026. But of course, if you have a home on this show, his book will be on the history of the FBI. And I cannot wait to see it. In the meantime, Defending Rights and Dissent is the organization of which he is the policy director. They deserve our support because they are supporting us. Chip Gibbons, sending you and that hat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Attorney Mark Fancher, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? When you think of the FBI, just what is your, because we have a lived experience, but of course, as a lawyer, you have looked at them, you've examined them. Who are they?
Well, I think that Chip Gibbons described them well as an intelligence agency. They're looking to get dirt and compile information that's useful to advance the cause of those with power. And you know, I have to be honest. When Kash Patel was first proposed as the director, I was actually quite excited because he said that his first order of business was to close down the J. Edgar Hoover building and to dispatch all of these agents out to who knows where. And I thought that, well, no.
When you said who knows where, I mean, come on, Mark.
Well, I mean, that's what he said. And I said, well, okay, I can get with that program, you know, because I think that seriously, it is to the advantage of revolutionaries in particular to have that agency disbanded,
Yeah.
along with the other intelligence organizations. They have been laser focused on preventing full-scale transformation of our reality in this country.
Yeah.
And I think that in an odd sort of way, their focus may be shifting, and it will probably increasingly shift in the months and years to come, because they have always focused on the left and on communities of color, because these were the populations that were most likely to feel that they had nothing to lose by overturning the status quo, by bringing about full change in ways that would result in distributing wealth in a different way and changing the orientation of the military industrial complex and all of those kinds of things. That's what these communities were advocating. And that was harmful to the interest of those that the FBI has been set up to protect. And so, that's where they've been focused. They were not focused on white racists and the Klan and the white working class generally, because they were useful to the objective of breaking up these movements. Certainly the Klan was not going to help out uh, a civil rights movement or to advance the agenda of the Black Panther Party or the Black Power movement or Black Lives Matter or any of these organizations. They were always going to be trying to disrupt them,
Yeah.
which is what the FBI was trying to do. But what I think that the FBI probably are those who are pulling the strings at the FBI. What they have also understood is that the potential for militancy is greatest among the white working class, and we saw that play itself out on January 6th.
Yeah.
And the thing that has prevented them from being afraid of this community, this white working class community, is that they're thoroughly and totally confused and misled and misorganized in ways that don't make them a threat to those who really count as far as the FBI is concerned. The great danger, as far as they can see, is if the white working class ever wakes up, if they achieve some level of clarity in terms of what their true political and economic situation is, and they understand who their true class enemies are, and they begin to organize in ways that are intended to take aim at their true enemies, then they become a much greater threat than the traditional uh, those communities that were traditionally the focus of the FBI's surveillance. So the person who poses the greatest danger in the eyes of the FBI are those individuals who choose to try and wake up the white working class. And you find it on the white left historically. I think the white left has understood this too. Uh,
Mhm.
you found many white left organizations trying to organize communities of color. You find them leafleting and organizing rallies and all kinds of things in these communities. And if you ask them, well, what are you doing over here? I mean, why don't you go organize the white working class? They kind of look at their feet and they're not going to do that. They know how dangerous that is. And I think that as Trump begins to reveal himself, as the administration begins to make it clear that it's really billionaires who are benefiting and profiting from everything that he's doing, then I think it's going to increasingly cause many in the MAGA horde to start asking some serious questions about who really has the power here and who's really benefiting from the United States of America. And once we find out who that is, and if we find out if our suspicions are confirmed that they're doing this to our detriment, then
Mhm.
we're going to take aim and we're going to make sure that justice is done. And that's when the FBI is really going to shift its focus to a community other than
Us.
than Black people.
And to your point, when you look at these town hall meetings with that the Republican congressmen are having, quite frankly, their constituents, the people, well, everyone, whether people voted for them or not, are their constituents. But people who voted for them are populating these meetings, and they are angry. And they are so angry that they've unsettled the congressmen and the congresswomen. And the speaker has told them, don't have any more of these meetings because you're taking too much incoming fire and they're dangerous. So my question is, how do they deal with the terror threat within? Because at least as far as I know, these persons, hardworking average Americans, are not being classified as terrorists yet. Are you saying that dot 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 ellipsis could that happen?
Oh, I think so. Um, I don't know if Cash Patel is going to be the one to do it, but I think somehow those with power will find a way to transform these people into people who they are somehow able to justify as targets for the wrath of the state. And you saw a little of that with January 6th. I mean, certainly Trump has tried to portray those who participated in it as as heroic and as patriots, et cetera. But the mainstream media uh, worked overtime to try and provide the most graphic images they could of the violence that took place there, really focusing on the dangers to law enforcement that these people posed. And if there is an interest in demonizing, uh, anybody, then they have ways of doing that. Uh, they can tarnish the reputation of pretty much anyone without very much effort.
And they have the cooperation of the legacy or corporate media to do it. My question is, how risky is that? Because because all of these intelligence agencies, they're tied up in social media, they're tied up in the media, in the broader media itself. So my question is, how do they do that, and if you will, keep the peace?
Well, it really becomes a question of whether keeping the peace is their objective. If they can find a way to leverage domestic, uh, turmoil and conflict in a way that's going to advance, whatever overriding objective they have, then they won't hesitate to sacrifice the safety and the lives of U.S. citizens in order to do that. They've done that historically. Even I mean, I think you have made frequent references to the fact that during Dr. King's final demonstration in Memphis, that violence broke out. Lots of innocent people were at risk because the FBI sent agents in to disrupt and to create chaos and turmoil.
A young
Uh,
man who was a Morehouse man, who was also connected to the CIA. Yeah, I mean, and it was the only violent demonstration that he had had in his 13 years of ministry. The only one. And it felt, I can tell you, having listened to my father talk about it and having known Reverend James Bevel and all, Reverend Bernard Lee, all those people who were there, they said it did not feel right. And it turns out that it was the FBI, the CIA, these intelligence agencies, and they're all over the place. I mean, because that's Big Brother, that's the tech industry, and they're everywhere. They're all over us, Mark.
yeah.
I mean,
And,
so I
and
mean, what do we do now? Because they're all over us. They're all around us. It's like they got their. It's this hydra that's that's like all over us. You can't move.
well, see, we don't need to be afraid. I think that that's our biggest enemy, and I think that they count on that. And I think that the more people understand about who they are and how they operate, the less of a threat they are. And I think that people really need to appreciate just how ruthless they are. Uh, one of
Why?
the things, hmm?
Why do we need to appreciate that?
Oh, because I think that they've been historically underestimated. Kathleen Cleaver uh, said that in an interview. She said that they knew that the Panther Party, Black Panther Party, knew that they were being targeted by the FBI, but they had no idea the lengths to which they would go in order to destroy the party. And just to give you an example of what they did, in Southern California, we all during the holidays we celebrate Kwanzaa.
Mhm.
The man who originated that, Malana Ron Karenga,
Mhm.
back in the '60s had an organization that was called US, and it was a Black nationalist organization. And what the FBI did is they created this war between the US organization and the Black Panther Party, so that the FBI did not have to go in and to shoot up these people. He had them shooting at each other. And the way that they would do it is they would do things like they would send letters that FBI agents authored to people, and they would say, "Hey, soul brother, you don't know me, but I'm just another soul brother out here who happened to be over at the US organization meeting the other day, and I heard how they planning to come and get you, how they plotting to come and take you out next Saturday. Now I'm just passing along some information so that you'll be prepared." And so then they would send the same type of a letter to somebody in US organization about how the Panthers were going to come get them. And then everybody freaks out and says, well, we better go get them before they get us. And the next thing you know, you got two Black organizations shooting at each other. Now that's documented. I mean, those kinds of things came out during the congressional hearings, and have come out as a result of Freedom of Information Act disclosures. So they're prepared to do that sort of thing. But because we know that now, many people who are organizing in a serious way, when they get things that sound suspicious, when they get communications and messages that don't quite sound right, it's standard procedure now to call up the person who allegedly sent it and to say, hey, I got this thing. Did you send this? So the more we know, the less effective they are. And they're kind of stupid because they stick with the same kind of playbook and don't change it up very much because they think we're stupid. And it's as as evidence of how much we've grown and how our consciousness has risen. Back in the 1950s and the 1960s, when in the movement in the South, there were problems with local, white populations and mobs that were harassing people and causing people problems. Sort of a standard slogan. Well, we need to get the federal government in here to investigate. We need to get the federal government in here to protect us, not knowing that the FBI would come down there and instead of looking at the white mobs and the white racists, would look at the civil rights movement itself. We know that now, and to suggest such a thing now among anybody with any movement experience, is laughable. Nobody's going to think or even entertain the thought or the idea that the FBI is going to help out the movement. So the higher our consciousness, the more we know, the less effective they are. And sometimes it works on a small level. I mean, the FBI really got involved back during the 1980s in spying on and harassing activists who were trying to provide solidarity to people in Central America
Mhm.
who were resisting Ronald Reagan's attempts to create disruption and chaos and havoc down there. And this is anecdotal, but I heard an account from one activist who said that she was visited by, no, that she got her Freedom of Information Act file. And what she found was a report that had been filled out by an agent who reported that he had visited her, that he had knocked on her door, and that she answered the door and said, "I don't have to talk to you. I will never talk to you. Leave my house now." And he says that he left and he is closing the file. And
Ah,
so she was asked, "Well, so what's remarkable about that?" She said, "That encounter never happened." I mean, so that the agent knew enough to know that it would be futile to even approach this woman, and so he just filled out the report, just so that he could say he touched that base. So it helps to know, and it helps for them to know that we're not afraid of them, and that they can't disrupt us, they can't confuse us, they can't cause the problems that they've caused in the past.
so, of course, we're not going to be afraid of Cash Patel, but just project out in about a minute before we go. What should we be doing as you see all of these movements popping up and you see them on the right and the left, Mark, because people are literally hungry, they're losing their jobs. I guess everybody in America is black now or indigenous. So, or they're beginning to feel like they're being treated that way. So what should we be expecting of the FBI? And just what do we do? Because I'm not fearful because we've survived, and I think that even if your life is taken, that just enlarges you, quite frankly. If if you're on the side of the Almighty, that is to say.
Yeah, we have to look upon this period as a great blessing.
Hmm.
I know that it's uncomfortable and people feel on edge and it's been disruptive, but it has also been extremely educational. It has opened the eyes of so many who would have remained in ignorant darkness for who knows how long into the future if they were not having these experiences and watching these things unfold. And we need to continue to point out the contradictions and help to educate people. Because unfortunately, even these MAGA people who ultimately are going to turn on Trump uh, will continue, unless they're educated, they will continue to still have a certain degree of animosity against us, against the white supremacy is real, racism is real, and it doesn't just go away because they realize that they've been betrayed by Donald Trump. And so the contradictions need to be pointed out. The education needs to take place. The task that no white leftist has ever wanted to undertake in terms of trying to educate the white working class, that still needs to be performed. And I think one of the most important things that we need to remember is something that the Black Lives Matter movement knew and learned very well. I was so proud of them. And that is that we have to have decentralized organizations, no more charismatic leaders.
Mhm.
And we have to organize so that everybody in the organization knows as much as any leader would. Because the secret to their success in the past, to the FBI success, has been that they identify the person who is the charismatic leader. And they know that if they jail this person, if they kill this person, then the whole movement is going to fall apart.
Hmm.
If everybody in the movement, if everybody in the organization is as conscious, is as well read, has an analysis that is as sophisticated as any leader, then it doesn't matter how many people they jail or how many people they kill, the movement continues to move forward. The organization continues to move forward. If we learn nothing else from our past experiences with the FBI, we should have learned that.
And that really is because at the end of the day, it is everybody's responsibility. It is our responsibility. I love you and thank you for your keen analysis, you and Chip Gibbons, defending rights and dissent. Hey, everybody, be vigilant and keep your eyes open and get involved. This is, you're right, Attorney Mark Fancher. This is a blessed time. We are being, everything that was whispered about, hinted at, everything you might have suspected is now being revealed. Now, what are you going to do with the information?
Yeah, God works in ways that we don't understand all the time, but boy, does he work well.
Does he work and perfectly? Wonders to what? Perform. Every time. You can't beat God now, can you? No, you cannot. God has got it all figured out. I am Santita Jackson here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, sending you much love. See you in another hour. Well, no, in a few minutes for the next hour. Back in just a minute.